So now let's go ahead and look at how to do stratified sampling in this particular workflow. Now, one thing to remember that when you are doing stratified sampling, you can only stratify by a specific attribute. In this particular example, we chose color as a strata. So you had one bucket and you chose color to kind of distinguish between the red and the green balls, and hence you are able to do that. Similarly, in the context of the training data set that we have, we also need to identify the right attribute through which we could do the stratifying, or the right attribute through which we can create stratas. So a couple of the candidates are the male or female, correct? Either of them. So we know that in the Titanic, correct, 65% of the passengers were male and 35% of the passengers were female. Now that could be a good data point that you might want to select for stratifying your sample. Alternately, you could also select survived, which is nothing but the label that you're looking to predict. Now let's look at survived as well, and you will see that in the Titanic ship, there are 62% of the passengers did not survive, whereas 38% of the passengers did survive. Now, when you do stratified sampling by survived, you also account for all the female passengers who survived. We already know from the description that most of the passengers who survived the Titanic were female passengers and a few passengers who are children. Now, having said that, survived could be a great attribute through which we can do a stratified sampling. Let's see how we can do that. So in this particular workflow, you click on select, you select on split data, and then you say stratified sample split as true. Once you say stratified split as true, you will get to launch the column selector. You launch the column selector and you select the attribute through which you want to do a stratified sampling. In this particular case, we want to select survived and we want to say OK, and we want to run the workflow. Now let's just run the workflow. Let's run this particular workflow. Correct. And in this particular in this particular scenario, I'm just running that particular step. Now, when we run that, so you get two different samples here. The 80% of the data set which goes for the train, and 20% of the data set which goes for the test. Now let's look at the composition of the 80% of the data set. And let's look at survived. And as you can see here, that there are 38% of the passengers who survived, and there are 62% of the passengers who did not survive, and which is exactly the same proportion in the context of the original data set as well. Let's also look at the male and female composition. And you can see that 35% of the passengers are female and 65% of the passengers are male, which is consistent with our earlier observation. Now let's look at the other split. And as you can see here, there are about 178 passengers in this particular list, of which when we select survived, we can see that 38% of the passengers survived and 62% of the passengers did not survive. Again, which is very consistent with the earlier split that we saw. And it's also consistent with the overall proportion in the original population. Now let's look at the gender as well. And as you can see here, there's a slight difference. There are 37% of the passengers have been selected as female and 63% of the passengers have been selected as male. Now that's fine as long as we stick to a particular rule. So in this case, having selected as survived as the stratified sampling strategy, we are able to make sure that whatever proportion exists in the original population, we are able to carry forward towards our samplings.